Faith Forged in Fire, where we dive headfirst into the unique challenges and triumphs that comes with being a firefighter, all while exploring what it means to live out a biblical worldview. Join us as we find hope, perseverance, and faith in the midst of the heat and chaos. Welcome to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the hero debate, a closer biblical look at first responders. I'm Joshua, and sitting across the table from me is
Rich.
Hey, Rich, or Chief.
Chief.
How you been?
Good.
Well, it is so good to be here. Today we actually are going to be responding to a TikTok video that I found. So I found this video. I actually was pretty impressed by it in a lot of ways, but we're going to listen to it and then we're going to respond to it. So to set this up a little bit, the guy who did it is Joe, I think it's Pianka. I don't know how you say his name.
Close enough.
But he is an MD, actually an ER doc. So coming from an ER doc that you and I would look at and go, whoa, those guys, they know their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He makes the argument that the true heroes are first responders, which is really amazing for me to hear from somebody like that.
It was, yeah. When I watched the video, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. So but I have some thoughts on it, as you do. So we're going to go ahead and watch it or listen to it.
So let's talk about emergency medical personnel, first responders, if you will, paramedics. You guys deserve some of the biggest thanks in all of healthcare and are probably the most underappreciated and recognized. And I'm going to mention why for a moment. So for most of us in healthcare, when we get called to chaotic emergency situations, there's some semblance of control. There are things that are already put into place. For example, if I get called into an operating room, I know where the patient is, everything is set up, ready to go. If individuals see someone for the first time in a trauma bay in the emergency room, personnel is all lined up, ready to go. And there's some grasp of what we're familiar with in reality. First responders, you got to remember, are seeing the worst of the worst in terms of what medical conditions have to show. And it's in the setting of someone's home or in the field. And there's no semblance of organization. I got to believe that has the greatest impact on the psyche and contributor to PTSD than can be imaginable. It's just something that you can't imagine sometimes. You guys and gals are sorting out the pieces for the rest of us, sometimes picking up the pieces and then bringing it to a place where we can carry on the torch and help. But if it wasn't for the efforts that you individuals do out in the field, I think the rest of us would be lost, as well as so very many lives. So I think you guys and gals are the biggest heroes in all of healthcare. And during those early days of the pandemic, when you guys were doing that stuff with very little protection, very little guidance, just, hey, go out and do it. And those calls were coming in left and right, and people were literally dying on the way to the hospital. How did you guys bear that on your shoulders? How do you bear it now? You're just heroes. That's how you do it. And we all owe a great debt of gratitude to you. Thank you all. And as for the rest of you, I'll see you next video.
All right. So what are your initial thoughts there, Chief?
It's surprising to hear that an ER doctor thinks that we make that big of a difference. I mean, a lot of times people just think you're just the first responder. You're just there to chit chat with the patient until ALS gets there. And you know that it's more important than that. You know, we get the baseline vitals right away. And that's important.
Right. There's a lot that we can do right away. There's a lot that we can't do. I tell people if we're not doing much, that's a good thing because it's not that bad.
Right.
Because when they're not as bad, there's less that we can do as first responders. For us, it's MFR level. Depending on where you're listening, it's, we're kind of one of the lower licensures, yet there's still quite a bit we can do if things go bad. That's really the thing is if we get on scene and we're busy doing stuff, things aren't very good.
Right. Yeah. If we're trying to stop bleeding or whatever, then.
And we've talked about this, and a lot of people have talked, pretty much across the scene with first responders. If a nurse shows up on our scene, that generally is not something I appreciate. Now, there have been some that are really helpful, but to his point, they're used to having everything just perfect, and we just kind of make it happen.
Well, yeah, and I believe it was one that you had a nurse show up and she wanted a drug.
Yeah,
to give to the patient, and it's like, man, I wish, but
right,
we don't. We're out in the field. We're not in a trauma bay.
Right. It always amazes me when I wheel a patient into the trauma bay and you've got 10, 15, maybe 20 doctors and nurses all lined up, ready to go. Somebody on a computer, somebody that's doing absolutely nothing than just calling out the orders, and it's like clockwork. Right. It amazes me.
And they all have their job. You and I and somebody else goes on a car accident. You might be doing extrication. I might be doing patient care. The next time it might be the other way around, where if you go to ER, everybody has their jobs.
Yeah. I'll never forget the first time I walked into a trauma bay. The first time I ever drove somebody to the hospital, it was actually when I was still on your fire department, and car was actually up in trees, and so we had to get the chainsaw and cut limbs down just to get to the patient and get the patient out. I come strolling in, pushing the car into the ER or into the trauma bay, having never been in there before. And we have a pretty significant trauma bay here in West Michigan that's top notch. I'm covered in sawdust, got my bunker gear, and I just walk in. I'm like, what is going on, man?
I think they're kind of used to that when they get somebody from the north coming in.
And I was intimidated. Now they'll ask me questions, and I'm way less intimidated because I've done it.
Yep.
But his point of we just do it, and we see a lot of things. I think we are so used to that it just doesn't transfer. Like we don't think about how odd that is. I think in the last podcast, it's funny to me how normal things are that shouldn't be normal. And that's one of them. We'll grab whatever we can to do whatever we can, because it's usually life or death in that situation. So you just try it. It's puzzle solving, and it's thinking outside of the box every time.
And like for me, if you're on a car accident and you've got your medical bag or your engine, you know where those things are. That's part of your responsibility, is to know where these things are in the bag. If you need an OPA or an NPA or whatever, you need to know that.
Right.
Now, if they call for a rider and you're in the back of the ambulance and they say, grab me this, now you're in their house, so to speak.
Yep.
You're in the back of their rig. Where is that at?
Yep.
I have no clue.
Right. So, I'm learning where to get what a lot of our paramedics affectionately call the party box, right? The med box. I'm learning that now. It's different for me here because I work for the county medical, which is also what the ambulance service is. We're all under the same employer. So we train together, we work together, we've gotten to know each other. So for me to get on the ambulance, that's actually my house too. So I have a more of a responsibility to learn that. I also drive more often because of that. But that's also why often when they say, do you want to ride or drive? Depending on what's going on, I'll drive.
I don't know. Normally I get the short straw. It's kind of like you look out the window, and if the roads are not in real good shape, I always draw the short straw and have to drive. And then you got white knuckles and your hands are numb by the time you're backing into the ER bay, So, yeah, I think most of the time I'd rather ride in the back.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on what we're doing.
Yeah.
Now I take a lot of encouragement. That's to have somebody like that recognize, though, kind of the chaos, what seems to be chaos out on a scene, and to recognize that and acknowledge that it's just different from what they get, right? They aren't, well, eventually they're dealing probably with the family. We deal immediately with the family. Right. We deal with whatever mess has happened at the time, and they're already getting a patient, as we call it, packaged up for them and ready.
And most of the time, like, when we go into ER, we're helping push the cot in, and the family members don't go into the trauma bay.
Right.
They've got to stay out. So they have, I don't know if you want to call it a luxury, but they don't have the parents, the husband, the wife, or whatever in that stressful moment watching over them.
Right.
And how many times have you done CPR in the living room with the family members right behind you?
You talk about not wanting to mess up,
right,
or wanting to make sure you know exactly what you're doing when you're supposed to do it.
Right.
We've had times where we've had to ask the police, hey, can you remove this person because it's becoming an issue?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to deal with all of that like we do.
Right.
So let's move on really to the part that I wanted to talk more about. I really have an appreciation for that. And it's times like that when I think I just reminded of the reality of what we do on a regular basis and don't think a lot about.
And it's also good to see that an ER doctor, I don't know if you want to say he's thinking down to our level, but at least he appreciates it. He understands what we're going through to do the best we can do to get him a better patient.
Right. Right. And then there's always, not to get derailed, how many times do we have a patient, we talk to them, and they give you all the history of what's going on. The ambulance shows up, EMT or paramedic starts talking to them, and they tell you something, and the ambulance crew, ALS, looks at you like, well, why didn't you treat that? And, well, this is the first time hearing about it. They never said that.
Right.
And you feel dumb. But I've also then ridden or driven to the hospital. It happens to them too. They roll a patient in and the patient starts talking about, and the ER is like, oh, well, why didn't you take care of this? And the ambulance crew is like, well, because they didn't tell us.
Right. Do you have any prior medical history? No, I'm healthy. High blood pressure, anything like that? No. And then when you're writing down the drugs, you see blood pressure medications, and it's like, oh, hey.
And that's just normal. And so I felt the first time I saw that happen, though, to an ALS crew, I was happy.
Because it happens to everybody, and you realize it.
To everybody,
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I want to talk about is more this idea of him saying we are the real heroes. There's a part of me that struggles, partly just because we're normal people going about normal life. We're human. We mess up. We don't always do it the right way. There's a lot of reasons that I do not like being considered a hero. I heard somebody say that, I forget now, you can look it up, but they said the greatest act of bravery a firefighter will ever make is the day he decides to be a firefighter. After that, it's all just in the line of duty. And I kind of like that. Although I would say I had no idea. I didn't fully grasp what I was getting into when I signed up. So maybe that's not a fair assessment either.
I think that might have been designed that way.
That would have been designed that way. Hey, come be a chaplain. Anyway, we're going to get distracted. But so my point being is I want to talk a little bit about this idea of hero. So the title is The Hero Debate. And then it's a closer look at first responders, but I want to take a biblical look at first responders and begin to understand. So here's how I want to throw this out to you, Rich, and kind of see how you think about it. Just recently, I was talking to somebody about this, and it could have even been on this podcast. I don't remember. But I said this: I don't blame myself if the call is not successful in our eyes, right? If the outcome is not what we want, I don't blame myself. Now, I'm going to question myself. I'm going to kick myself a little bit. Could I have done this better? Could I have done that better? But generally, because of my faith, because of my relationship with God, and we'll talk about why, but I have learned I don't blame myself for that. On the other side of that, if things go really well, I don't take credit for that either, because the same reason I can't blame myself, I can't take credit for it either. When we were thinking about this, when I was thinking about this, my mind even went to this. Okay. You received an award for being a hero, if we want to say it that way. You received an award for saving a lady's life. Your crew, your team saved a lady's life in a car accident, internal decapitation.
Correct.
Here's the crazy thing. You guys had no idea.
No.
You were just following protocol.
Yeah, we had no, I mean, and actually when I've got the notification that I was getting this award, I'm running through my brain going like, okay, what call could this, I don't remember doing CPR and getting a pulse back, getting the guy in the rig, getting him down to the ambulance. I'm like, what is this for?
Yeah.
So I actually had to call the medical, I don't know his technical name, it's Lance, but he heads up the medical division. And he told me what it was. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess.
I had that happen. I got from the American Heart Association, I got a certificate and a little heart in the mail one day. And my wife's like, well, look at this. And I'm like, what? And then I start reading and realize that it's because somebody I did CPR on walked out of the hospital. I had no idea who that person was because we never know. Once we get a heartbeat back, if we get a heartbeat back, put them in the ambulance, take them to the hospital, we're pretty much done. Now, we maybe can find out. The only way I knew was because on our little closed Facebook page that we have for the county ambulance service, for our medical service, I saw the EMT and paramedic with the same award. And I'm like, oh, it was that call.
Yeah.
That was with them. Okay. Right. So, but otherwise we generally don't even know.
Right.
So how do you feel about, and we know if you listen and if you haven't, go back a couple episodes to listen to your story, there was a time you did blame yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now, now that I'm looking at it through new glasses, if you want to call it that, there wasn't really anything that I could have changed. For that call, there's nothing I could do. But in that point, I didn't have the glasses on that I have now.
Right.
So now it's like, we get there, we always do the best we can. And if the outcome's, I say what we want, then we're happy.
Yeah.
But we really don't have control over that.
No, so here's really kind of the thought, and here's what we hear all the time. I hear it wherever, anytime somebody dies, basically. I mean, it doesn't really matter the age. I hear, they were taken too soon, right? Their life was too short, and we feel that pressure. The younger the person, the more pressure, but we feel that pressure of not just feeling it like it's in your hands. And it's not, but we feel that way. And this way of thinking that if you and I are saying, well, that person was taken too soon, that lends itself to blaming ourselves for the call not going the way we want it to.
Right. And you always, and it's weird, but I see it happening. If you run a call for an 85-year-old male and they pass away, you have this vision of like, hey, he had a good life. He lived 85 years. But then if you turn around and you go on a call that involves an 18-year-old that doesn't make it, then it's like, oh, man, he had his whole life ahead of him. Well,
right.
How do you know that?
Well, that's a great, you just teed me up, Rich, for what we're going to talk about here. And this is, when you talk about new glasses, these are kind of the new glasses, right? We're looking at this from a biblical standpoint.
Correct.
In Psalms, there's a couple passages in Psalms that David talks about. He says in Psalm 31:15, my times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. What I want to look at is the very beginning of that. He says, my times are in your hand. That means my time, my life is in God's hands. If you go to Psalm 139:16, it says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. So this verse says, before I took my first breath, God had already determined my last breath. So if you and I are on a fire ground and I go down, I know you're going to do everything you can to make sure my life is saved. And if you can't, I know that that's not going to be easy for you. The reality is There was nothing you could have done to change that. We never can add another day to our lives. God has already determined it. And when we walk into any scene with that in mind, that truth alone helps me a ton.
It does. And I don't remember the date, but a couple months ago, we lost an infant. And I texted you and said, hey, had a bad call. But I saw the difference in how I responded from 10, 15 years ago
right
to now. Because I have was that a fun call to go on? Absolutely not. Did I like the outcome? Absolutely not. But I also know that it wasn't in my control.
But right. And that's hard for us. It's hard for us to understand because we want more than anything to be the hero. We want to be, to me, that one of the coolest things is when somebody walks back into your fire station. And that doesn't happen very often just because they just generally don't they don't thank us, which is fine. We're not here for that.
Right.
But it's really special when somebody that was going to die or basically was clinically dead, they walk back in your fire station to thank you for what you did. We always want that. And I don't understand where God's plan and his sovereignty and man's responsibility come together. But this is another one of those areas because you and I can never add another day to somebody's life. But I also understand I have a really, really high responsibility to make sure I'm training to do my very best in those situations.
Exactly. Yeah, because that might not have been, maybe the heart attack or the cardiac issue was in the plan. And the plan was to save this person.
Right. And now I need to be the vessel or the tool or whatever you want to call it that God's going to use to make sure they have more days.
Right. And that's kind of the way I've been looking at it lately is we're tools.
Yeah, we are.
We went on this call. God put us in this position. He put us on this call for this reason.
Yep.
And the outcome is the outcome. I mean, we can train. We can't save everybody. Then again, you might get something like the one that we got the award for with the internal decapitation. I've never trained with that. It's normal C-spine precautions, C-collar, just taking care of the patient. We didn't do anything heroic.
Right. You literally followed protocol.
Yeah, we followed protocol with absolutely no idea what had happened to this.
But we do that so often. In a lot of ways, and I don't mean this to sound like you didn't care, but you were kind of just doing it without thinking about it, sort of. I mean, you were, but we just do that. We know, okay, here's the situation, here's the protocols. We walk through the protocols.
We gave her the same care that we would anybody else.
Right.
Granted, it was a little different because she got hit so hard in the rear end that the bumper was up against the rear front seats. Right. So we had a little warning that, hey, there's some bad stuff going on here. But you got to be on your A game. You got to treat her just like anybody else in a serious car accident.
It's probably better you didn't know, or you'd have been really nervous.
Exactly.
So if we keep thinking about scripture here, how these things can play out, and what this doctor's thought of kind of us being heroes, how do we deal with this? Ephesians 1:11 says, "In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of his will." And here's the key. It says, "Who works all things according to the counsel of his will." So that person, making it or not making it, is exactly what God had in store. The way he uses us, and like you said, even God's appointing us to be on that scene, it very well could be that there are things that he needs us to work through. You talked about shoes in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a bigger shoe because of some other issue in our life that God's trying to work through. So he gives us a bigger shoe to expose, oh, I thought I was doing good in this area, but now I've got this struggle. Every single part of it is part of his plan. I still just think it's absolutely crazy that this is my life, but it is, and it's part of his plan. And so here we are. I'm thankful that I can deal with that stuff better than a lot of people, or better than some people, I should say, simply because of my relationship with God, because of understanding that he's in control. It doesn't mean that it's not still there sometimes, but understanding his plan and where I fit in that really is helpful to me.
Right. Makes it a little easier to understand what's going on.
Well, that's really kind of our thoughts on that. Anything else you want to add to that, Chief?
I don't have much more other than, I'm like with you. I signed up for this job to help people out. Like you're saying, it's great. I've had it one time where a guy came back, and
it doesn't happen very often,
and said,
does it?
Thank you. And like you're saying, it's good. It's great to see somebody that you saved their life, or, you were part of saving the person's life. But how many other have you done and they've got no thanks?
No
it doesn't
idea.
make me go, I'm not going to do this anymore. Nobody cares.
I had to also realize this. Every once in a while, the ALS crew will say, hey, good job. We saved a life today. And you realize it might not have felt like we saved a life, but because we were there, it maybe never got to where we were like, oh, we're saving his life. But because we were there quickly and we did what we did, it never got to that point. If we would have never showed up, they wouldn't have made it at all.
Right.
And so sometimes just to be reminded that even the more normal calls, there's times we're saving a life, but we don't think it, which is good that we kind of don't think about it, because that means we've gotten to the point where we're just doing what we do.
Yeah, and it's a blessing. People don't call 911 to have medical people show up because they've got nothing better to do. We respond on their worst days, and it's a blessing to be able to be a person that makes their life a little bit better on their bad days.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. I hear that music. That means we're about done, but I want to make sure to tell you, I have been kind of failing to do this, but if you enjoyed this podcast, you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. We are pretty much everywhere, and we are on YouTube, and we would love to have you jump over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Just search Faith Forged in Fire on YouTube. You'll find us. If you want to see what we look like, you can watch it there. The best part about YouTube is you can drop a comment. So let us know what you think about this episode. Let us know what you think about the video. That's really what we want to hear. Not about us, but what you think about this ER Doc. And let us know. Subscribe to our channel. We are out.